So you was explaining us before about this golden century when Iceland got this personality, yeah, this golden times. What happened in these times to get this chain?
The kind of idea was that, and in a sense that is a fact, that in the 12th and 13th century in particular, Iceland was a place of great literary production, and there were a lot of sagas written and a lot of literature and histories, and I mean, this is in many ways an inexplicable phenomenon. I mean, we don't know why, but this is what happened. And so the 13th century was the kind of period of greatest production. So in the 14th and 15th century, this kind of literary production declined. It never disappeared. Iceland continued to be a place of rather strong literary production, but the kind of golden age of the 13th century disappeared. So when historians begin to look at Icelandic history and interpret it in the 19th century in the kind of nationalistic way of thinking, they saw the kind of development of Icelandic history as the kind of demonstration of the importance of sovereignty, importance of the nation to be free from foreign rule or whatever. So they say, in the 13th century, Iceland was this kind of literary hotbed. Then in the late 13th century, Iceland became part of the Norwegian kingdom, and then they say, okay, everything went bad after that. Of course, there are more kind of economic reasons for this, because there are many reasons why this happened. Most important reason probably was that the country was, when the settlers came here in the late 9th and 10th centuries, the country was unspoiled. No one had lived here, but ecology was very sensitive. So what happens is that it becomes overexploited very quickly, and there's a soil erosion, the vegetation declines. So that is one reason. I mean, the country becomes less habitable than it was before. And then also in let's say in the 14th century, the climate gets colder, and Iceland is really on the margins of being inhabitable. So that is kind of economic and natural reasons for these kind of cultural and social decline. But in the 19th century, that was not the way in which people looked at it. They saw this as a political, there were political reasons for this. The Danes Iceland became part of the Danish monarchy in the late 14th century with Norway, and remained in the Danish monarchy, well, until 1918, and became republic in 1944. So in the 19th century, nationalism became the kind of ideological fashion in Iceland as it was in most of Europe, especially in countries similar to Iceland, rather poor peripheries of Europe. You can see this in all over the place. Then people begin to imagine their past in a new way, and they begin to look at their history in a new way, and this is what happened in Iceland. They see the kind of clear connection between the political situation of the country and the kind of cultural and economic situation. And so what they want to do is to kind of take Iceland out of the Danish monarchy, and they see that as the first step for the country to become prosperous again, both in cultural and economic terms.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that maybe has been shaping a peculiar character from Iceland people, this geographically situation. Because you are really in the north, the communications and the connection have to be hard. So this, I think, I shape a kind of character really proper of.
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, the kind of the natural environment has its, especially it has its kind of social effects. I mean, Icelandic society was for centuries agricultural society. There were no towns and villages in the whole country, and there was a very strong sense of the importance of agriculture, not only as an economic activity, but also as a kind of social activity. So in the late 19th century, there was a very strong opposition to the kind of economic development that was taking place. Gradually in the 19th century, agriculture begins to lose out, because simply it couldn't sustain enough people. I mean, because the country had always been rather sparsely populated, and there had always been these kind of plagues and volcanic eruptions and which created famines and which kept down in population. So the population was very low. In the 19th century, this began to change, and this is in a sense the effect of change in communication, as you were saying. I mean, it's because there is a communication revolution in the 19th century, not only in Iceland but in the whole world, with steam power being used first for trains and then for ships. So the kind of communication to Iceland becomes less difficult, and price of imported food declines. So there is this kind of population increase in Iceland in the 19th century, and gradually that kind of breaks the old system of social system in the country, which had been based on the agriculture. So the 19th century is, especially the late 19th century, is a period of extremely rapid change in Iceland, both politically and also social and economically. So in the early 20th century, Iceland had been, until the 19th century, remarkably stagnant. I mean, the economy was more or less the same through the whole, since the settlement to the early 19th century. Agrarian with fishing as being kind of subsidiary of agriculture. So the people that did the fishing were mostly peasants who came in parts of the year down to the coast and fished. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, this changed. Fishing becomes, and mechanized fishing, industrialized fishing becomes the kind of basis of Iceland's economy, and it kind of opens up new economic opportunities that didn't exist before. So in the First World War, around that time, Iceland had become relatively prosperous. I mean, it was still the poorest country in Western Europe, but it was still much better situated than it had been before. So in the First World War, Icelanders feel that they can't really let their dream come true and become independent. And that was happens really in 1918. Iceland becomes a sovereign state in union with Denmark. So we had the same king, but we were more or less independent. So, and that is the kind of, for the nationalists, they interpret this as a result of more freedom, but I would interpret it rather that more freedom came with more prosperity. So it's not freedom first and then prosperity, it's prosperity first and then freedom, because it was impossible to sustain an independent or sovereign state if you cannot feed yourself. I mean, that's impossible.
You have to fall for the stomach and then to ask for freedom.
Yeah, you also have to create the kind of infrastructure that all independent states have to have. University, for example, was founded in Iceland in 1911. I mean, and that was seen as a very important stepping stone towards that kind of self-sustainability, and that is true. I mean, it's so in a very short period of time, from the late 19th century until, let's say, end of the First World War, this kind of infrastructure was created, and that is, of course, related to both increased population, but also increased prosperity in the country.
Yeah. This infrastructure was created, but never military. Was inside this
and that was always an extremely important part of the kind of Icelandic self-image, so Icelandic identity was, not to have a military, to trust the kind of system of neutrality. Iceland would be neutral in all of these kind of wars, but Iceland always kind of trusted that someone would help them if need be. And when you come into the 20th century, that becomes clear. I mean, already in the 19th century, in the Napoleonic Wars, Iceland was under the British sphere of influence. Denmark, for example, which Iceland was related to at the time, was in war with Britain. But Britain was really controlling Iceland at the time because Iceland was in the middle of the sea, the North Atlantic, and the Brits, they controlled the North Atlantic. So in the First World War, this happens again. When there is another world war, Iceland is more or less taken over by the Brits, and economically they're taken over because they did not want Iceland to export their fish to Denmark because they were afraid that would go directly to Germany, which it would, because of the kind of closeness between Denmark and Germany. And in the Second World War, the same thing happens. Iceland is that is the first time when Iceland is taken over militarily by anyone, and that's by the British. And I think Icelanders were pretty happy that it was the British, not the Germans that came, but that was what happened. So in the 20th century, Iceland becomes militarily extremely important, but it does not develop its own military, and that has never been the desire of anyone. And is in some sense in contradiction to that kind of strong sense of wanting to be sovereign, because the kind of it's always seen in political science as being one of the main functions of a sovereign state is to protect their citizens from outside interference, and Iceland has never been able to do that. It's always trusted the kind of remoteness of the country until the 20th century. I mean, that became clearly impossible. I mean, we have a coast guard with 3 ships, and they're mostly rescue operations. That's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting that this transparency that population is demanding, together with the fact that the population say to the government, you should ask me by signing. This is like something new that many time ago is Iceland writing new page in the history of this country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's there is this kind of sense that the politicians, they failed the nation. I mean, there was this. It's clear that the whole political class didn't do their job. I mean, they kind of the banks, they were allowed to expand and to grow and to do what they were doing, you know, without any kind of supervision by the people who were elected to supervise. And so people, I mean, I think the kind of demand for transparency is based on the idea that there is a lack of trust. I mean, that's clear. And there is a very good reason why people do not trust the politicians. I mean, it's clear that the whole system, the collapse, happened because they were not doing their job. I mean, they were not. There was no accountability, and there is a sense that nothing has really happened to, you know, the bad guys who are seen as the bad guys, you know, the banksters as they are called. I mean, that they are still, you know, free. I mean, why is a person put into prison if he or she steals, you know, packets of cigarettes? And if you steal $1 billion, I mean, you are living in London in luxury. I mean, that's because it's clear that these people were stealing. I mean, they were doing that in maybe in a legal manner, but at least in the end they are not going to pay for it. So I think that is also one of the kind of fuel. It's the fuel to that kind of sentiment that there has to be some kind of recognition of the, you know, that people have to be able to follow what's happening, because in the end we are responsible. So there are people always saying, I mean, and this is one of the kind of ideas behind this, is that, well, people there were silent in 2007. I mean, no one was complaining. I mean, we had a fantastic life. I mean, people were buying things like crazy and running up debts because they were cheap, and they were quite happy with it. And then everything collapses, and then people say, why didn't you say something in 2007 when there was still a time? And, you know, one possible answer is that people didn't know. I mean, people were not asking the question. So I think there is this kind of sense that the only way we can prevent this from happening is to be that we are following what the politicians are doing, and so far that is going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been a very strange period of time. I'm a historian, so and one of my fields is French history, and so I have read quite a bit about the French Revolution, and there was this sense in early 2009 that Iceland was on the brink of a revolution. I mean and I was very amazed because Iceland had always been a very tranquil society, it's a non-revolutionary society, and there's always been a very strong sense of law-abidingness and kind of respect for authority and things like that, at least some respect. But suddenly people, were screaming in the street and just saying wanted to kick, all people in power out, and so there was this kind of moment of where you can see like people hesitating on the precipice, and should we jump or should we not, and then a few days later kind of retracted. And it was amazing for historians to watch. I mean, because revolutions never happen when authority is strong. Revolutions always happen. Then I'm talking about real revolutions. Like revolutionary societies, like the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. I mean, these revolutions happen when authority has collapsed, when the kind of power system, the government has really collapsed. Then the revolution comes in. The revolutionaries come in and fill the kind of vacuum, of power vacuum. And there was this kind of sense in Iceland in 2009, January 2009, that there was a power vacuum that had to be filled. And, like as I say, I mean, there was this kind of maybe a week where it could have gone either way. And in the end, people decide, okay, let's change government and see what happens.
Yeah.
That now people are very dissatisfied with the government that came in and are asking for the same parties that they threw out, so I don't know.
Yeah. But maybe in this way, government or some political part have come back to the population by asking them to rewrite the constitution, like the common agreement between all the people and the power.
I think it's amazing, kind of experiment, and I have no idea how it will go. I mean, because the Iceland Constitution is a strange beast. I mean, it's really the Constitution of Iceland today is the Danish Constitution from 1849. Okay, so we got the Constitution, our first Constitution in 1874. We were part of the Danish monarchy. But Icelanders refused to accept the Danish constitution from 1849. They wanted their own constitution, and we got it in 1874, which was a particular constitution for Iceland, inside of the Danish monarchy. And that constitution was a kind of, a mirror of the Danish one. So in 1944, Iceland became a republic, and they more or less only changed the king into a president with some strange rules that we are feeling now about the president. No one really knows what power the president is. That's another story. But that was really the only change, and for most of the time until very recently, I mean, the president was very inactive in politics. So the constitution was more or less unchanged from 1874 to the present. But in 1944, it was the kind of feeling that it had to be changed. I mean, we needed a total kind of reorganization of the constitution. It was beginning to be antiquated. I mean, in Denmark had revamped its constitution in the 1950s. So, but in the constitution it says that the only institution that can change the constitution is parliament. And this happens through a parliament changes something in the constitution, then the parliament is sent home, there are new parliamentary elections, and the new parliament is elected, and if that parliament accepts the constitution change, it is accepted. So it is a parliament with parliamentary elections in between. And parliament has never been able to change the constitution in any significant way. I mean, there have been, for example, in the late 1990s, there was a totally new and fairly liberal kind of human rights section that was put into it, and that was possible. But this kind of reorganization was impossible. They had been trying and trying and trying, forming committees and writing new, but it never came to anything. So now the feeling is that the parliament is unable to do it. I mean, they can't do it. So we need to ask the people to do it. So that's why this kind of this kind of election of a constitutive assembly happened. But there is the problem is that there is this kind of divisiveness about it. I mean, there are some people who want it, but other people don't. And it's clear that the Conservative Party is against it, which is the largest party in Iceland. And that kind of, so we will see, I mean, what comes out of it. They will need to do a very good job in a very short time if they are really going to succeed. I mean, it's because in the end it's the parliament that has to accept it. So they come up with a new constitution. Parliament has to accept it, and then there have to be parliamentary elections, and then a new parliament has to accept it. Because you can't really, you have to, if you're going to change the constitution, you have to do it on the basis on the constitution. I mean, you cannot simply say a new constitution, and then you would be breaking the constitution, and that's a revolution. And that's I don't think there is any willingness to do that. So it's an extremely interesting experiment, but will it succeed? I have no idea. I mean, we will see. I mean, it can break up into total infighting, and they can say, I mean, one wants that, another one wants something else, and nothing comes out of it. So, and there are people who want that to happen. I mean, there are people in Iceland who had it nice before the crash, and well, they want to have it nice. I mean, they have power and money, and so why change things?
But at least this is running. This is alive. This process of build another constitution.
Yeah, it's starting tomorrow actually. So what happened was that the election was in January, if I remember correctly, earlier this year, and then the Supreme Court of Iceland ruled that the elections had been illegal. It was very difficult to keep it absolutely secret because people were not allowed to fold it because they were read electronically. So they were. I mean, no one really suggested that there was any kind of corruption in this. It's just simply no one doubted that the results were accurate, but they were, as I say. So the Supreme Court said, okay, these elections they did not follow the rule of law, and they are invalid. So what they did was simply to say that these people are not. Election was thrown out, but the people were allowed to do the things because, I mean, they don't have any authority anyway. I mean, they only can write a suggestion. That Parliament has to, to vote on anyway. So we will see what happens. And they are going to start to 25 people, who are supposed to write a new constitution from the beginning.
Yeah. Let's see what.
In a very open process. I mean, their deliberations will be open. I'm sure that people are going to follow and they are going to air their opinions.
Interesting. I have just two questions that you can summarize because you have to know.
Yeah.
Is about the vote this name of April, because I'm feeling that this is the third time that is asking this. I don't know. It's a kind of.
I said you mean
kind of business like you began with 5.5 of rate of interest. Now is less. Is a negotiation. This is the first question. That what do you think about this? The third time that is the question, and what do you think that will happen? Yes or no?
Okay, so this is actually the second time that it comes to a referendum. I mean, this is the third time that they have negotiated. This first negotiation, they simply was, Parliament refused it. Second time, it was vetoed by the president and then went into referendum. And the third time, the same thing happens, and that is going to happen now. I mean, there is going to be a referendum on the Iceland question. It's impossible to tell at the moment how it will go. It is very, very close. I would have said a month ago that it would be impossible to have a yes. There is a, because this touches the core of Icelandic nationalism. I mean, these are the foreigners who are imposing something on Icelanders, and Icelanders are not very fond of that kind of idea. Now I'm not so sure, because I mean it's clear that to me, I mean it is clear that the most sensible thing is to say yes. I mean this is not something that is going away. This is something that Icelanders can blame, maybe not on themselves, but at least on their authorities. I mean it's clear that these banks grew way big, and the people who should have done something about it are our government, our authorities, who did not. And this is not a question of and this is the way in which it's presented. That this is that the citizens should not bail out the banks, but that is not what's happening now, because that has already happened. I mean, first of all, the Iceland banks were not bailed out. I mean, they went overboard. But what this is that we have British and Dutch depositors, people. I mean, some of them are rich, but most of them are just people like us, who put their money into the Icelandic banks, believing that the Icelandic banks were backed by the Icelandic government. Well, at least the government said they were, but then no one really knows if that's the case. So it is really the British and Dutch taxpayers who are going to get Iceland money if the money comes, because, as you say, the banksters are out of the picture anyway. I mean, they're not part of this deal. So this is between Icelandic and Dutch and British taxpayers who is going to pay for the mess. And I think it's fair that we pay some of it. I mean, and I think it is something that we should learn from. I mean, we should learn that Iceland is not a country of great financial wizards. It's a small country that has no experience in banking, and this should never have happened. And I, as a professor of history at the university, should have said something. I did not. I mean, and sometimes you do mistakes, and then you have to learn from them. But having said that, I mean, I think another lesson that we should take from this is exactly this: that we should set much stricter rules for the banks. I mean, this should not have happened. I mean, it shouldn't be us who pay for the kind of greed of our banksters. That's clear. But you have to do the rules beforehand. You cannot really insure yourself when the accident has happened. I mean, that's too late. I mean, that's the lesson that we should learn. The lesson we should learn is that we should have an open, transparent, politically active society that is involved in these questions, not after they happen, but before they happen. And then we might kind of prevent these things from happening, and most definitely put the guilty ones in prison, and I hope that happens. But that's a different story. That is not what is taking place now in April. That's a different question. That's my opinion. But what will happen, I don't know. I mean, we'll see.
Okay. Let's see what will be the forecast.
I would say I think now I think it will be accepted with very narrow margins, and I don't think that will be the end of it. And either way it goes, I mean, this is going to be a very difficult thing for Icelandic society, because even if it will be accepted, people will be very angry. Those who are against it, they will find everything that's if anything happens, then we all blame it on this. So it's unfortunate, but life is tough. I mean, that's how it is. So hopefully, I mean, and they are hoping that the bank has really enough money and capital to pay for it, most of it, and maybe that will happen. So it will be very little in the end. So the kind of property of the bank has been growing, the old bank, because what it did was, what happened in 2008 was that the foreign lenders, meaning Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, and all these big multinational banks, they really suffered. I mean, they say that they lost 7,000 billion Icelandic kroner, which is, I mean, what we are paying. We are talking about here 30 billion Icelandic kroner maybe.
Yeah.
So that is what really happened. But how on earth? Why did the loan lend all this money to these guys? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the mess of this debt, the nature and the responsible people have personal richness that they could pay back.
Yeah, there are all kinds of things there that need, and they are being investigated, but it's so difficult to investigate these things. People just want to take them and throw them into prison, but of course we cannot do that.
Okay.
Otherwise, really screaming.
Okay, so thank you very much.